Okay, well, welcome to the Pinball Hacking Panel at the Portland Retro Gaming Expo 2018. I will be your host, Ben Heckendorn, or Ben Heck, or whatever my name is supposed to be. So I figured today I would talk about some of the stuff I've done with pinball in the past, how I got started into hacking it, and finish up with talking about the process that goes into some of the newer games that I've worked on with Spooky Pinball, which the newest one would be the Alice Cooper Nightmare Castle. I don't believe they have one here at the show, but it is shipping now. So I always thought pinball was kind of cool when I was a kid. I remember seeing a lot of the early, like the System 9 games, like from '89, 1990, Funhouse, stuff like that. And I always thought it was kind of cool that they were telling a story in an abstract way with a pinball rolling around the playfield. I always thought that was kind of cool, and it was very arcadey. So I was kind of interested in it. I never really played a whole lot, but I found them neat. So then many years later, I think it was around 2009, actually it's a little bit before that, I was like, I want a new project, like something to do in the background. And you always see stuff that I do online, like, video game consoles or hacks. But usually there's always some project that I personally want to do. So I was like, okay, I want to make a pinball machine now, because I thought that would be a really interesting challenge. So in 2009, I started making a machine based off Bill Paxton, the late great actor. And pictured here is the very first pinball circuit I ever wired up, and it's awful. And I think it's some sort of binary counter. I don't even remember anymore. But this is just basically like the very, very first genesis of doing that. And I should point out, when I started working on pinball stuff in 2009, that was actually my first foray into microcontrollers. I had bought them before and tinkered around with them, but I hadn't really done anything very serious. So it was actually pinball machines that got me into that. So it's a great example of how your passion in one thing can teach you actually valuable life skills in other departments. So this is actually still in use up at SS Billiards in Minneapolis. That's where the Bill Paxton game is now. This was the driver board for input, output, and lights. And as you can see, it's all Radio Shack Bakelite. It's got a whole bunch of shift registers, pull-up resistors, ports, power regulators. But it worked, and it still works today. I can't believe it, because that machine was very shoddily assembled. But I guess that's good. Oh yeah, so this is back when I started using SD cards. I'm like, hey, SD cards can hold tons of memory and they're super cheap. So I had it's pretty self-explanatory what's on these two cards. So I was actually running two different file systems because I didn't know what I was doing. One for the voice and one for the music, so they could play at the same time. Very important. And before I had even started building this machine, because I'm self-employed, I was working from home, I would be working on my other projects, and I'd be playing Bill Paxton DVDs on my laptop. And whenever like a good quote came along, I would stop what I was doing, I would go back, rewind, and then record the quote off of the DVD. So I have the whole bank of awesome Bill Paxton quotes. I also did that for the movie Roadhouse, which I think would be a great pinball as well, but I haven't gotten around to building it, because unfortunately I've gotten to the point where I can't spend time making games I don't have the license to. So this was the very first playfield for Bill Paxton pinball. So it's being routed out as some plywood here. It looks like I actually used MDO, a medium density overlay. That's plywood with paper on top. And I did that so it was easier to apply the graphics. Again, I did not know what I was doing. So I laid down white, basically white vinyl. And the reason I did that was so it was easier to apply the art. So you could lay down the white vinyl as like a base substrate, and then print the art out on another layer of vinyl, then spray a bunch of soapy water on the white layer, and then position the art the way you need it to be. Of course, nowadays, most manufacturers are doing direct printing, which is basically like a giant XY piezo printer. They print the playfields on a bed like this. That's how it's done now. But again, this was like 8 years ago. Then I was doing some mechs. This is like the fish head mech, which is a very obscure Bill Paxton reference. Like it sings when you play the game, and that was pretty fun. So just stuff like that. I just wanted to make. I was like, well, this is the only time I'm ever going to make a pinball, haha. So I'm going to just put all sorts of weird mechanisms in it and stuff. And there's the fish afterwards. And again, it's very primitive. So there's a fish head. It's a group called Barnes and Barnes, and they're like this really old obscure group. And then they have a video about their song Fish Heads, and it was directed and starring Bill Paxton. when he was like a baby. It was like even before Terminator. It's like super old. Yeah, and then so this was the result. This was the Bill Paxton game that I completed in March of 2010, I want to say. And it's all the features. It has a hams can, because for whatever reason he drinks hams in all his movies. There's the fish head with like a cleaver, and the cleaver is actually an acrylic piece, so it's actually a 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional prop. Back here, this was like a mechanical sub game for the movie U-571. So the waves would move, and then a sub was on a linear actuator, and it would come out, and then basically you had to make a shot when the sub was directly in the middle, and then you'd get some points. That was actually pretty ridiculous that I would do that. See, I wouldn't even put that into a game now. I'd be like, that's too ridiculous. Yeah, then we have like a little cross-section of like a wrecked Titanic to explore, the 1957 Corvette that he drove in True Lies, Brittany Daniels from Club Dread, which is a funny movie if you've ever seen it. But here's something interesting. See how her body and arms extend onto the apron? That's actually printed at a different scale because of the perspective. So it's actually, what was it? It was shrunk. So this is shrunk like 20%. So when you look at it with perspective, the shoulder lines match. So that was kind of a fun detail that I put into it. Oh, then he had a TV show called Big Love on HBO with 3 wives. So 1, 2, 3 wives, multi-ball. It writes itself. Yeah, so I took that to a show in at MGC in Wisconsin, the Midwest Gaming Classic, which is a great show. And everyone played it, and everyone's like, this is awesome. And I thought it was really funny because parents would be playing it with their kids, and it has quite a bit of profanity in it, and they didn't seem to care at all. So I thought that was very funny. So this is probably like 2010, and then I started talking. So the thing is, if you make something cool like this, then the old pinhead guys will talk to you. They'll be like, hey, that's impressive. So I started meeting all of the classic industry people around this time. And I think it was the same this first year. This guy walks up. I don't know, he's like in his 50s or something. He's got a big mustache. And he plays the game for like 45 minutes, and we're talking and talking. And I don't know who he is. And then finally he says, I'm Roger Sharp. And I'm like, holy shit, because I knew his name, but I didn't know what he looked like. And if you're pinball fans, Roger Sharp, he's most famous for making pinball legal in a court battle by playing pinball machine in court to prove that it could be a game of skill, not just chance. That's why I see a lot of pinball machines that say, a game of skill, is because a lot of states and municipalities consider them to be gambling. Which they were, actually, because if you got extra credits, a lot of bartenders would pay you the credits. But anyway, so yeah, it was really cool starting to meet a lot of the industry people and, you know, learning things, like learning how to do things the right way. I mean, like if you look at this isn't even PETG, this is all acrylic. Again, it's a wonder this thing still works, but it does. So that's cool. So then what happened was I was like, okay, I want to make another game, you know, and I want to do this some more. And, oh crap, I didn't mean to do that. Sorry about that. OneDrive. Just 1 second. Sorry about that. To make sure that it's all secretive. Yeah, so I started working on more prototypes. And that was around the time that I met Charlie Emery, who would go on to found Spooky Pinball. So the story behind that was, I think it was at MGC, it was like a year or two later, and there's this Godzilla game that he made. I don't know if any of you have ever seen it, but he took a Firepower 2 and he reskinned it into a Godzilla theme. And but he had access to a direct format printer, and I'm like, you printed this playfield directly? And he's like, yes, sir. That's my Chuck impression. And I'm like, oh, we should be friends. And so what I did was I made him a soundboard that would sit on the switch matrix for his Firepower 2. And it would look for switch combinations and then play audio clips from Godzilla. So basically the first thing that we did together was I made him that adapter that would basically give his game life and sounds. So after that, he was like, I'm going to start my own pinball company. And I was like, wow, you're crazy. But he did it anyway. So around this time, I had been working on another game. Now I did the Bill Paxton thing, and I also was making like a fan game of like Lost. You know, most people when they make homebrew pins, they make Ghost in the Shell, Nightmare Before Christmas. You know, they're always making something based on a movie or a franchise they like. So I was like, you know what? If I actually want to do this for real, I need to make something unlicensed that I can sell. And this is before we could afford real licenses as well. So that's when I started working on Ghost Squad. And this is one of the early designs of it. So the way I was approaching pinball design at the time is I would make a very simple white wood out of MDO, medium density overlay. And then I had the basic features in like the Italian bottom. And then I started building things up in foam core, right? So you can see like this ramp is still pretty much in the game, but we had some crossovers here. There was a target that was a giant hand, like a psychic hand. Then I just changed that into a regular target. And then here's where the ghost ended up being. And that went through a lot of iterations. It was like a moving bookshelf, like Scooby-Doo. It was like a rotating thing, like Toten. And then originally I'm like, well, this is a game about ghosts. There should be a big ghost in the game. And then we eventually did that. There was a captive Newton ball here at one time. The door, the spooky door that opens up, that's pretty much always been there, as well as that balcony jump, which wasn't really the best design decision. For anyone who's ever played the game, you make this orbit, there's a tight curve, and then it goes up and jumps. And Deadpool also borrowed that same idea, and I've heard that's also a little tricky to make in Deadpool, because the problem is, if you've got the ball curving here, and then you're supposed to go up this ramp, see that little balcony? That's a ramp with an entry from right to left. But the problem is, you need to have enough speed to get the ball up the ramp, but based off the speed, the trajectory of the ball, the angle of it is going to change. So it needs to have the right speed and the right angle to make it up a secondary ramp like that, and it's actually fairly tricky. And so it was something that I regretted doing on America's Most Haunted, and then when I saw it on Deadpool, I was like, also, I'm like, oh, I love it when people rip me off. That's good. Yeah. I remember George Gomez actually played my Lost prototype, and he's like, this game sucks. And I'm like, yeah, it kind of does. And then when Roger Sharp played America's Most Haunted, which is what this game turned into, he's like, I gotta tell you, Ben, I liked your Bill Paxton game, but then I played your Lost game, and I'm like, oh no, he's going backwards. But this game's pretty good. So, yeah. So this is actually a much more, this is a lot closer to what was actually made. The Ghost was gonna have 3 axes of rotation. He was gonna have 2 arms, and he was gonna rotate, which was just too much stuff to do. You know, simplify, simplify, simplify. And we didn't really have a loop at that time. We had targets with targets behind it. But then what I did was I turned that into a metal loop. So you can go vroom like that and vroom like that. So you can have like some quick turnaround. And also there was pretty much always a magnet in there. So you catch the ball and use it as a ball lock, a temporary ball hold. You know, it gives you a lot of potential for rules. Like these, you know, you got 3 targets. You know, you can clear them. You can hit any of them. I just wanted to have a lot of variety. You can see here the captive ball has been turned into another target. Actually, that one right there, I remember Steve Ritchie, when he played it, he's like, you gotta make that a skinny target. So I did. So if Steve Ritchie says something, you do it. Yeah, but then, this scoop, that was another thing. See, it's supposed to go across, right? It's like, boom, right? And if the power's not right, it goes boom down the middle. So if I were to do this again, I would make it feed that way. So yeah, you know, those are just things that you learn. Oh, there's that curve I was talking about. So it's like, right, just like that. And we wanted like an elevator there, or we called it the elevator. That went through a couple of revisions as well. So basically, you can either do the orbit and the return, or it goes bloop into the elevator and locks the ball, and that goes down into the subway right there. So there's also an entry point. Like if you do an orbit here, it goes into a subway hole down out there. Yeah, so I'd watched a lot of those ghost hunting shows, so I thought, well, this is something everyone's heard of. Everyone has cable. Well, they used to have cable, and they, you know, they've always seen all these silly shows. So I thought that would be a good theme. So here's the Ghost. I made him out of clay, which is the one on the right, and then I 3D scanned it and made it the actual size, which is the one on the left. Now, if you notice, his arms look really gimpy. Now, this is back before we had any money. Well, I had money, but I wasn't spending it on the game, you know, because never spend your own money. But we 3D printed the Ghost, but you can't 3D print arms like that. So I actually took the model and I chopped his arms off, and so he's like, hey, I'll be like a stubby ghost. And then I used a sculptor and I brought them up like this. So it's like 45-degree angle, which means you can print it without support, which means you can print it faster. So like all of the ghosts that are in America's Most Haunted were pretty much, most of them are printed on my 3D printer. I would just do it at work. Whenever we weren't using it on the show, it was always just printing ghosts. And it was 3 hours per ghost. Oh, there you go, right there. So I have one of the original MakerBot Replicator 1s from 2012, and it still works, even after printing all of those ghosts. But you see that support there? That takes extra time to print, because the arms are sticking straight up. But by having the arms at a 45-degree angle up, they support themselves, much like the arch on a bridge, and you don't need the supports, and it cut the print time down from like 3 hours and 45 minutes down to like just under 3. And then at one point, a friend of mine was like, why isn't the ghost hollow? And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, well, you could light up the ghost. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's a really good idea. Then I had a lot of trouble because it was a fairly complex mesh, because it was 3D scanned, so I had to simplify it. Then I could do basically a mesh inner subtraction to make it hollow. Because a 3D print is hollow, but to actually make it hollow, you have to model an inner shell as well. That actually took me like a day or two.
Which software do you use?
That ghost was captured with Autodesk 123D Catch. So that was back when you would just take a whole bunch of photos with your digital camera. You remember those? And then you'd upload. You basically, what I would do is you couldn't put it on a table and rotate it because the software actually analyzed the background as well to figure out the rotation. So you basically put it on a table and walk around it in a circle taking photos. So I took a bunch of like straight on photos and then about 3/4 down, and the software creates a 3D model. It's actually pretty good. The bottom of it isn't usually super watertight. You just go in there and you slice it off. And then I also used, blanking it, OpenSCAD. I use that to make a parametric base that I attach to the STL mesh, and that is what interfaces or connects to the servo that makes them go back and forth. So this is the first prototype playfield, and this actually ended up being the playfield I did all of my programming on as well. So I cut it on my own CNC machine, which at this time I owned. Yeah, so it's pretty obvious. So there's a little hole I talked about. So you do the orbit, the ball falls in behind the elevator, subway to the scoop, or the elevator lowers the ball down into that hole, blah, blah, blah. There's that jump ramp switch, so that's good because you can tell if the ball's headed toward the jump ramp, which means you can also detect if it failed. So very important stuff. So yeah, I mean, there aren't, there's only like 60 lights on this game. Then I had my stupid rollover post up here, which wasn't a very good design because the ball doesn't have very many chances to get up there. But again, didn't really know what I was doing. And then this is pretty much, this isn't the production model of the game. This is my own prototype. If you look at, it's got a lot of laser cut parts. This is all laser cut steel on the real game. But it's mechanically all there. So this was what I used to program pretty much the entire game. And then I think I sold this playfield to Pinball Bulbs, which I think is actually up in this area, in the second neck of the woods. So I'm like an anti-hoarder. I grew up in rural Wisconsin, which is filled with farmers who fill their lawns with garbage. And so my mom brainwashed me to not hoard. So when I'm done programming a playfield, bye-bye. If someone else wants to hang it on the wall, good for you. So I would say I'm like not married and I have money, so it's like I could get in real trouble if I was a hoarder. So I have to like not be a hoarder. Yeah. Oh, if you also see here, these are all brass habit trails. So basically, it's easy to bend, and then you can just solder it with a blowtorch, and then we turn it into steel. So this wasn't a very robust playfield, but it was perfectly adequate for prototyping everything that we needed for the game. Okay. This is our first horrible backglass that everyone hated, because you cannot have photos of people who are not famous and put them at a pinball. Basically, people think of 1980s Gottliebs like Gold Wings or Millionaire or insert Gottlieb game here. So at the last minute, we had to take this. I basically gave it to an artist, and I'm like, okay, people hate it because he uses photos. The composition is fine. So he basically just redrew it, and there's like, oh, now it's perfectly okay. And that's kind of what it's all about in pinball, especially now ever since Stern got back into the hand-drawn art with, I think, Metallica. Basically, the genie's out of the bottle, and no one can ever, well, almost no one can go back to the Photoshop art days. Yeah, but, I mean, I think it could be a little bit more dynamic, but whatever, it works. Plus, we didn't really have any money. So here is our coveted board set. So this was designed by myself and a friend of mine from Texas, and we designed our own board set because other alternatives like P-Rock are far too expensive. So this is really quite simple. It's just one microcontroller that does all the game logic, and a second microcontroller which does the audio and video. This one just sends commands to that one, and it does it. Like, see, we only populated the coil controls that we needed. So this is all money in our pocket, right there. Anything we didn't use. But yeah, that's all we used. And the board set on Rob Zombie, Dominoes, and Jetsons is really not that much different from this. It's just more robust. It's
it uses better parts. It has a 4-layer board. It has more fusing. But yeah, this worked. I mean, it definitely had some drawbacks, like the SD card makes it kind of hard to update. There's a USB port. You have to actually update it using a computer, which kind of sucks. It has the ability to update itself, but really when I was so busy making America's Most Haunted, I didn't really have time to work on the lower level hardware. But then we moved on to Rob Zombie. I'm like, okay, now I have the time. Since I wasn't like the lead designer of Rob Zombie, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna figure out a way to make this board program itself, which I did. Basically, when you boot the coprocessor, the video processor, it's attached to the SD card, right? Because it's doing all the audio video, and that's where the DMD hooks up. So basically, when you boot up, if there's a flag set, if you like say, okay, update game, then you restart the machine, so there's a flag set, the coprocessor will actually take control of the main processor and basically do an AVR bootloader program of it. So the coprocessor will program the main processor because the coprocessor has access to the SD card. So that's where you put the hex files, bada boom. Just through sheer luck, the command lines we were using to communicate between the PIC and the prop also could function as a TX-RX UART. So like that basically worked out. So we were able to change the bootloader and make it work. So then on the Rob Zombie games and later, basically you would just make a new SD card image, stick in the SD card, and hold down a button when you boot it, and the system will reprogram itself automatically. Oh, this is, I should also mention, I can't help it, but the Thunderbirds game out there, that game was inspired by our online documentation, and it actually has a duplicate of this board set in it, which is interesting. So we had everything on GitHub. So at a certain point, it was open source. However, a couple years in, when America's Most Haunted started selling, and it was starting to become like actually like limited, there's only a certain number. Someone was trying to clone it. They were trying to buy all the parts so they could build their own, and that's when we took the code down, basically. So, yeah, I might put it back up someday. Okay, so this is Steve Ritchie's back. The first time he played it, and he's really violent with video game or pinball machines. He's moving all over the place. And this is when he was like, you gotta make that target skinny, right? Oh wait, no, this is after he told me, because they're skinny target. Okay, this is a year later. And the best praise you can get out of Steve Ritchie is, it doesn't suck. So, mission accomplished. Okay, this is the very first game we shipped. So it was so ragtag. Not making this up, they were starting to pallet the game and wrap plastic around it, but I still had the USB cable in it doing one final update before it went out the door. And then the trucker guy, not pictured here, he was sitting there waiting to pick it up, to pick up the pallet. So that is what it was like at the very beginning. Very, very slipshod. So then what I started doing was I started figuring out a way to like basically hack color into the system so we could use it for the Rob Zombie games. And I found this really cool LCD. It's like a widescreen LCD. It's meant for like a sun visor in a car. Very strange, but it's perfect for pinball. And then so I started basically figuring out a way I could use the standard hardware to just do color. So we ended up doing something like color DMD, where we have a frame buffer on the main system, and then we just send it over via serial to an FPGA on the screen, and that gives us our color dots. Because we wanted to go to color, but honestly at that time we could not justify the price increase to PROC. Yes, sir?
Wasn't there an episode of the Ben Heck Show about you hacking this display?
We did an episode about FPGA. Yes, yes, you're right. Yes, because we showed how to control that display with an FPGA controller. Because I had to, that particular display I got from China, I had to reverse engineer it using a scope, but it wasn't too complicated. Yeah, so then we did. On Rob Zombie, I wrote about half of dialogue and also storyboarded quite a bit of it. So we're really into storyboards when we're trying to figure out what's on the screen, which I'll get to in just a second here. So yeah, I was working on a game. It hasn't come out yet. I don't know if it's going to. So basically, since America's Most Haunted, I've been mostly doing support, like technical support, board support, and then I've done a lot of writing. Like a lot of the gross animations in Rob Zombie were from my twisted brain, and David Van Ness, who is the animator down in Texas. Yeah, so then the most recent game that we've done, or that we worked on, was Alice Cooper's Nightmare Castle, which I don't think is at the show here. Oh, let me just back up a second. So yeah, let me just show you some of the stuff we worked on. So
Microsoft Office has a program called OneNote, which I think actually is even free. You don't even need to have an Office subscription to get it. And it's actually really cool because what you can do is multiple people can collaborate on the same document at the same time. So when we started working on Alice Cooper, we're like, hey, let's, myself and David Van Ness, who is the video guy down in Texas, we both logged into the same document and we could actually sit there and work on storyboards together. And so basically we went through everything. We're like, okay, Alice Cooper, so what is it? And because kind of with Alice Cooper, David and I came up with a lot of the basic rules and ideas, and then the programmer implemented them. So we're like, okay, well, it's like Dragon's Lair. It's like a castle. Like you're going. The game is called Alice Cooper's Nightmare Castle. So hey, you're going through the castle. So okay, what's in a castle? There's rooms. So we were figuring out, okay, what are the rooms? So we were like, okay, there's got to be a guy being tortured on a rack. And then we thought this was kind of cool. I was inspired by Outrun, where you have all the branching paths to drive your car. So you start here, right, in the Alice Cooper game, and the monster's here. And in every room, you can choose which way to go by making left or right orbits. And so this is the foyer, monster room, and so you have library, parlor, kitchen, conservatory, torture room, lab. And you can basically choose which way you go through it. And it's not in the code quite yet. Like the version that's shipping, they haven't added it, but in each room, there's different items that you can collect. So you can use those items as modifiers when you battle each one of the monsters. And there's 9 frickin' monsters, way too many monsters. And I thought that would be really cool because obviously, you can only go this way through the castle, so you can never collect all the items in one go, which means you'd always have a different way of approaching the modifiers when fighting the monsters. So I thought that would give the game some depth. Yeah, you can see here like the lab, you can go left and right and where it leads. So yeah, myself and David, we came up with all that stuff and just tried to figure out the best way, to give the game some depth and to give it kind of a dungeon crawl. They got pretty close with the actual graphic to this. Yeah, I think, yeah. Yeah, and then we got like our evil plant room. And we also wrote a bunch of lame dialogue, like when you go into the plant room, Alice Cooper says, the conservatory, it's so nice, you'll never want to leave. You recorded all those groaners. Oh, we also have this inside joke. Every time we make a pinball, we try to work dialogue from Roadhouse into it. And so I was trying to picture like this part in Rob Zombie where he quotes Roadhouse. And we're like, he just read it and he just said it. I think he was like, oh, what was it? I thought you'd be bigger or something else. There was some line from Roadhouse and he just said it. Rob Zombie was pretty easy to write for. I basically pictured him as a redneck drill instructor, and then just imagined that when I was writing the dialogue. Yeah, so we basically kind of hashed everything out right there, and then we took it against the play field. So Charlie's like, well, here's the play field, and we. So I have a Wacom computer at home, so you can go on OneNote. So basically, everyone can be drawing on the same document. It's really cool. And the lag's pretty, it's like about 1 second, which isn't too bad. So it's a really good thing for remote communication. So I also did all of the insert art on the game. So this was done by Jeff Zornow, the main art. But then I basically just sampled the color palette, and then I did all of the text typography art for this. Because we were working on the rules, so we're like, okay, this means this is your left movement, this is your right movement, this is killing your monster, draw your monsters here. Yeah, so myself and David Van Ness figured out quite a bit of that. Let me see if I have the next. So storyboards are, they're pretty good. So we would just give this to the artist, like, okay, first we see some people, and then a door opens, and then you have your multiple skill shots. So we kind of drew that up because obviously I'm not a great artist, but I can kind of picture what should be on a screen. And then we try to think of everything. So, okay, you're going to have a skill shot animation, a hallway animation, a match animation. I don't know if this is actually in the game. I think we call like the Jacob's Ladder, like, and then it forms a number at the top. I can't remember if that actually made it in the game or not. Yeah, so then we actually made a few more detailed drawings. So I kind of did this in reverse because it's a dark game, so I drew it on almost like a velvet painting. So I'm like, okay, we're in the kitchen, right? So I was talking about the items. So when you're in the kitchen, we need to at least have a fridge, a stove, and a pantry. And those represent shots in the playfield. So I think you can go in the pantry and you can get salt. And then if you're fighting the slug monster, it gives you a faster score against the slug monster. So everything has a modifier to it. And then like the bloody trail leads to the torture room. So I thought it'd be cool, if everything had I should have brought the actual final art from this, but I wasn't thinking. I guess I'm just being egotistical and showing you my storyboards. Yeah, so then we're like, okay, the dungeon room, you have to have a guy in a rack, so there's a shot you can hit, and every time you hit it, it's like, ah! So you can torture him. Very sadistic. A guillotine, which is a big Alice Cooper thing. But then again, like, a whip is an item, and so these are sprites on the back glass, so when you make certain shots in certain rooms, the sprite disappears and it's added that item to your collection. So everyone in the pinball industry is like going gaga to have an LCD. I personally think they're stupid because it's a pinball machine, not a video game. However, if you must have one, I was very insistent that the LCD needs to be there for a reason. So we need to show a representation of a room and there's items in it and then you can see them disappear. I've picked that up, I've collected it. All the rooms are different, they have different colors. And then also, in each room, we told the artist that we needed to have enough space for different players. So if there's only one player, obviously these indicators aren't here, but we couldn't have any critical art behind there. That way we didn't have to worry about it. So really, the whole game is kind of letterboxed inside of that, if you think about it. But there was one piece of art where there wasn't anything back here, and we had to go back and say, no, we need to have something down there, because if player 4 is not there, they're gonna see an empty hole, like the one in my soul. This one actually, this was the closest storyboard. Like, he basically drew this exactly the same, which is cool. So there's a shotgun, I think that fights one of the monsters. I don't think, the pool sticks, when you hit them, they animate into being broken, and then that's a stake to fight Dracula, the vampire or whatever. Dogs playing poker, of course. That's not in the game. But then what we do is we get the art back from Jeff, and then David will basically animate the art. So in the actual game, the lighting kind of undulates, the flames move. And I just thought it'd be really cool because, it reminded me of stuff like Dragon's Lair. And if you're going to have an LCD, and especially like if you have a license like Alice Cooper, what are you going to draw from? Like Wayne's World scene, music videos. It's not like doing The Hobbit or Batman or something. There's no content to put on the screen. So we had to create everything, which was a huge undertaking. I told Chuck it was going to be a huge undertaking. I don't think he believed me. He's like, oh, no, it won't be a big deal. And he's like, oh my God, this is difficult. Yeah, I don't know if this is in here, but there's going to be a disco ball mode, so we wanted to have like lights going everywhere. Yeah, so anyway, the storyboards worked out pretty well. The reason I did these mock-ups was because I wanted to make sure like there has to be a door here, and these have to be in the right positions, like formaldehyde, dynamite, to represent, the lanes on the pinball machine. So that's why I was really persnickety about these, was because I wanted to make sure that all the objects were in the right place. And this is when you start the game. So when you're in the foyer, you see this. This represents the two left and right paths. And then you hit the center targets, and then whatever monster you're going to go where you're going to look for, you see his portrait here, or her portrait, because I think there's a cold apples in there as well. So I really see games where it's like select your mode, right? So I was on like bash the target, bash the target. Every time you bash the 3-bank, then the monster changes, just to make it a little bit more active. Yeah, there's a library with a fly swatter. That's interesting. And oh yeah, this is the conservatory. So yeah, there's Wolf's Bane. Fights the werewolf, bug spray, shears, pitchfork. Yeah, so I just thought, there's already like 9 monsters. I drew this big matrix, so it's like each monster has 3 weaknesses, like, for Frankenstein it's pitchfork, whip, and electrode. But of course, you're never going to get more than 2 of those in any run because of the way the rooms are arranged. The items are arranged in the room also in such a way you can't collect them all. Because if you get all 3 items and you fight Frankenstein's monster, then you'd have all 3 modifiers, right? So you've already done it. But if you make it so you'll only ever have 2 of the 3 modifiers, that makes the game always different. So, and the modifiers basically are more points, more time, or faster kill. Fighting the monster. Like there's a bug, you rip his legs off. David Van Ness was really excited about the bug. He's like, oh, my kids are gonna love this. And we squish the bugs and his legs break off and the goo comes out. He's Australian. Yeah, so let's see here. I'll just show you a few more things. So we went through pretty much every mold. So Cold Ethel. It was kind of difficult making a quote-unquote family-friendly game with Alice Cooper because some of the songs are, they're a little sexual and stuff. Like this one where he's dancing with a corpse. So I thought this reminded me, I wanted this to be like Beauty and the Beast with Castlevania. So there's like candles in the background and stuff. So you see Alice Cooper here, they cut to reverse. And every time you cut to the reverse, she's getting more and more rotten, Cold Ethel is. Yeah, and then we get some candle references. So it's really cool in the game. So we have like the background candles moving in one direction and the foreground candles moving the other direction to get the parallax. So it's like fakey video game parallax. So Obviously I like video games. I'm at a convention here. So I like putting that stuff in because it's, I don't know, video games are good. Oh yeah, here's an example. So like when you fight Frankenstein's monster, it'll show you, okay, here are the modifiers you've collected. Lightning rod. It's like, this is what you've collected and this is what it does. And you're like, oh, that was the point of making that shot early on. So obviously people aren't going to understand that when they first play the game, but by making sure they have the information they need, they can learn how to play. Now any really good player is not even looking at the screen anyway. I like to think the screen is an advertisement for the other people watching. So when you're watching your friend play, like Deadpool, you don't watch the screen, but other people watch the screen when they're playing. They're like, oh, that's what that means. So, yeah, so we just went through all the monsters, and we basically, everything that could possibly happen, we had a storyboard, and then we gave all these to the artists so we could create enough art so we could basically then animate it. So it is kind of like, kind of what I would call slidey art. So it's like, you'll see a bunch of like, it'll kind of slide across the screen because we can't animate all the frames like Disney, like that would be stupidly astronomically expensive. So, we're kind of going for, I wouldn't even say archer art, just kind of like motion comic art. We wanted to look kind of like Tales from the Crypt, where it's a kind of like, colorful stuff. And Jeff Zornow, the artist who did all the art for the game, did a really good job. So then we're like, oh, here's, the guillotine. Oh, he's really happy he's going to lose his head. And like, there it goes. There's that'd be funny, like, there's like head mosh pit toss. So he's really happy. So we got like angry villagers and his head's being tossed around. And yeah. So yeah, and it was kind of fun. We brought a bunch of like, kind of gross jokes for like Igor is eating people. And one thing I wanted in the game, but I think Chuck shot it down, is I wanted to have like characters like Maniac Mansion. So you'd have like the jock, the cheerleader, the nerd, then the Thelma, like, but he's like, no, that's too much like Ghost Squad. You're just trying to make Ghost Squad again. I'm like, because the thing that's fun about that is if you have like some stereotypical characters, you can write jokes around it, which is what I did in Ghost Squad. But basically for Rob Zombie, I'm sorry, Alice Cooper, they just wanted it to be pretty much a straight horror thing. That was the same thing with Rob Zombie. We pitched it that you were a new roadie working for Rob Zombie, and it turns out all the monsters are real. And like you have to like battle all the monsters to work your way up to like crew chief, right? And he didn't want that. He was like, no, it's got to be a horror game. Yeah. Whatever. Hey, it's his license. Actually, one thing that some people are like, why did you Rob Zombie or Alice Cooper? Rob Zombie and Alice Cooper are both pinball fans. So Chuck, not so much Alice Cooper, but like Chuck would just call up Rob Zombie, Mr. Zombie, and be like, oh yeah, we're gonna do this. And you're like, okay. So yeah. Yeah, so basically we just storyboarded everything. So I gotta wrap this up pretty soon here. And basically we had to create all these frames, and then like, we had to think about, okay, you got text here, score goes here, everything has to fit. Most of the modern pinball machines with LCDs, I kind of take umbrage with the way they're done. Like there's a lot of white text on white backgrounds and like blue text on red backgrounds and like crap like that. And I'm like, ugh. JJP does an excellent job. Like I think like dialed into the screen is amazing. The other LCDs I don't really care for that much. So when we were doing this, I was very adamant that everything was clear, everything was comic booky, the text was easy to read. I don't know what it is with P-Rock, but I don't know if it's not powerful enough. You can't do stroke or drop shadow on text. So whenever possible, we just bake the text into the video. So all you have to do is draw the score part, just to make sure that everything is as clear as possible. Yeah, I don't have any like really gross storyboards like we did with Rob Zombie. Rob Zombie has some really gross storyboards. This one's not so bad. Yeah, so basically just a lot of storyboard work. So, if it seems like, oh, what's Ben doing? He's not doing anything with the show anymore, or he hasn't made a pinball machine. I have been working on things just kind of all behind the scenes with a lot of these games. So one last thing I can show you real quick. I can't show you, well, I could show you, but I'm not going to show you the game I was working on, but I want to show you this cool rotisserie that I made. So this is my super shooting rotisserie. This is an Italian bottom. This is MDO once again, but this is a foam cartridge. See that? That's a 1/2 inch by 20 inch by 30 inch cartridge. So what happens is you can actually slide that in and out so you can rapidly prototype new games. This is what I was using on my game in 2017. Then here's another example of it. Then this plugs into the cartridge top here, and see that handle? That locks in place. So see those white little tabs there? Those actually catch on right there, so basically it locks it really firmly in place. I had a rotisserie like this when I did America's Most Haunted, but it was a little wobbly. So when I rebuilt this super rotisserie, I wanted to make it rock solid, and it was. So this is the prototype rig I used on my game. Let me see if I can zoom in on it a little bit. Oh, Windows 10, they like changed the zoom. Come on. Would you like to update? No. Yeah, so we have, that's the new board, that's the same board that's in Rob Zombie. The LCD for testing purposes is gonna go there, I never put that on. And then, yeah, I've got all the button controls, so the start button, debug buttons, switch to simulate if the coin door is open or closed. My game is gonna have an auto plunger, so there's no plunger here. But then, yeah, you could play the game at 6.5 degrees as you prototyped it. And then this unhooks, and then there's a rotating piece here, so the whole playfield rotates and locks at 45-degree increments as well. So, yep, that turned out pretty well. Let's see if there's a couple more photos here I can show you. Okay, I blurred out the game I was working on, but this shows you how, once you're done with a revision, you slide the foam cartridge out, and then I would take photos of it, then as you can see there's a grid on it, right? So I would take the photos, align to the grid, and then draw the next revision in the computer. Then I would go to FedEx Kinko's, get a printout of that, spray adhesive it to the next piece of foam core, slide it in place, and then build it up again. So I did about 5 revisions of that for the game I was working on. The lost game to time. But yeah, this rotisserie is really awesome. So it's got the power supply, it's got all the wiring. I've upgraded it since then. There's actually plugs on the side for the switches and the solenoid. So if you want to add a solenoid, you just plug it in right there. And down here, you don't see it right here, but there's 16 brass bars for switches and rows. So if you want to add a switch, you just alligator clip it on and boom, it's on the matrix, no soldering. So yeah, that was some stuff that I was doing to rapidly prototype pins. Let's see if there's any, I think that's probably the last photo. Let me just double, yep, that was the last photo. Okay, cool, well, any questions? We have about 5 minutes left, I think. Yes, sir.
Did Bill Paxton ever find out about your pinball?
I've been asked that many, many times. The closest that came, the Queen Latifah show emailed me, and they're like, we have Bill Paxton coming on next week regarding the movie $1 Million Arm, and they're like, would it be possible to ship this game here so we could surprise him with it? But as shows often do, they emailed me with like 1 week turnaround time, so it was impossible to do. And but I wanted to do it just so I could answer that question. Yes, anyone else? Got a couple minutes left. Yes, sir.
If you're doing your own board again, would you still use the PIC 32 and the parallax propeller, or what would you do nowadays?
We made a prototype, but we didn't have it done in time for Alice Cooper, so unfortunately we had to use P-Rock. I won't make any bones about it. I don't like P-Rock. What we were using the same PIC 32, even though it's a bit old. There's a new PIC 32 MZ series, so it's going to be a PIC 32 as the main game processor. But then we removed the propeller and put in a Raspberry Pi 3 compute module. So that's like $23. And you stick it in place, and then we weren't even using the HDMI. We had an LVDS converter, so we're using direct TTL RGB from the Raspberry Pi through a $2 chip, and then we could plug the modern glass that Stern and Spooky uses right into it. Because an HDMI board is like $20. So yes, it's too bad we didn't get that done, because that, like the board set we put into Rob Zombie and everything else was $200. So we had by far the cheapest board set of anyone, which I think did help us out a lot. Yes, sir.
After the pinball stuff, what else have you been working on?
Since I stopped doing the show, I've been working on a lot of video game controller work. I've been doing accessibility controllers for persons with disabilities. I'm also working on a new version of my latency testing equipment that I sell to video game studios. I'm kind of big into that. You don't really see it, but yeah, so I've mostly been doing those prototypes. I do want to make a few kits in the future, like a Raspberry Pi portable video game system kit. Yeah, but that's pretty much what I've been doing since I finished the show, just going back and taking the time to finish up some long-term prototype projects I hadn't finished before. I might do another pinball machine someday, I'm not sure. What I would personally like to do is make like a really elegant pinball system that's just one beefy micro. I think that would be really elegant, because so many of these systems have like a single board computer and P-Rock and all these microcontrollers. It's like, bleh. Maybe one more? Yes, sir.
Have you thought about just selling pre-made shells for some of the projects you've made?
Oh, you mean like the enclosures?
Yeah.
I used to do that back in the day. I would actually make resin casts with silicon molds. I personally feel that 3D printers have become ubiquitous enough that it's not really super necessary anymore. Like the Raspberry Pi kit I was just talking about, we would probably just sell the PCB, and then the buyer would slap on a screen, slap on a battery, slap on a Pi, 3D print the case, and you're off to the races. Yeah, because it's a lot easier, because stuff like that, you just manufacture the PCB and then have someone else worry about the case. So it's one of those things, like if you give someone a case, they're like, oh, I already have a 3D printer, I don't need this. So yeah, I guess the answer would be no then. But I do kind of want to get back into making really cool, nice looking cases for my own projects, like I used to. I just kind of ran out of time over the years. I couldn't make things as beautiful as I once did. Yeah, good. All right, well, thank you all for coming. If you have any questions, just find me later and enjoy the show.